Excellent. Thank you very much. So welcome to the Renewable Energy, where we'll be looking today at the foundation of Alaska's next economy, lowering energy costs for Alaska consumers and providing many new jobs. The Alaska legislature has a critical opportunity to support Alaska's next economy by extending and funding the Alaska Renewable Energy Fund and establishing a Renewable Portfolio Standard for Railbelt electric utilities and a green bank. Expert speakers from across the sector and across the state will speak to outline the benefits and the opportunities for action in the 2023 legislative session. I would also like to give a shout out and a thank you to our sponsors. We have Alaska Climate Alliance, we have Regenerative Economics Working Group, and we also have SEAC with us, Launch Alaska, Renewable Energy Alaska, and Pacific Environmental. I'd like to invite Kay, my co-host, to please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kay Brown. I work with Pacific Environment here in Anchorage on Dena'ina lands, and I've been one of the leaders of the Regenerative Economies Working Group and one of the co-authors of our recent report, Thriving Alaska, which gives an overview of our big picture vision of how Alaska can move forward and have a prosperous economy, a new economy based on renewable energy. So thank you all for being with us today.
Yes, thank you, Kay, and thank you, Haley, for pulling up Thriving Alaska. As you can see on your screen, this document is available at that web address. It is free for you to obtain and to download as a PDF. Several partners went into this process of thinking thoughtfully about our future and regenerative economies, also just transition. How can our workforce, survive and thrive so that we can live well and enjoy our life and our future here in Alaska? So I invite you to download that and give it a good read. Okay. We are just now at 2:06 and we'll be transitioning to our first speaker. Penny Gage is with Launch Alaska, and she'll be discussing why renewables are a key piece to the plan for Alaska's economic prosperity and addressing climate change. Penny Gage is a managing director at Launch Alaska, where she oversees their accelerator program geared towards deployment of innovative climate technologies in Alaska, as well as their advocacy work to accelerate the energy transition in Alaska. She is Tlingit and grew up in Sitka and currently lives in Anchorage. So today I'm calling in from Dena'ina in Anchorage, Alaska. I'd invite all of our presenters to give a land acknowledgement from where you are presenting from as well. Ganashchish. Penny?
Good morning. No, good afternoon now. Tlingit chena kwasia ayak sai bleka chena penny yuchat duasak. Tlinarina chatsiti bleka yari ayachat gunachish. My Tlingit name is Kwasia and my English name is Penny Gage. My mother's family is from Petersburg and from the Raven Dog Salmon clan, and my father is white from Oregon. And I currently live in Anchorage. And I work at Launch Alaska. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating Alaska's energy transition. And we do this by working with startup companies. We see entrepreneurs as the key to help move this transition forward. And we work in the three sectors of energy, transportation, and industry. And our focus is on deployment. We get excited about putting steel in the ground, or in this case, wind turbines in the air or solar panels on racks. So that's what really motivates our work every day. So thank you for the opportunity to provide some opening remarks today. You're about to hear from some amazing people who are going to preview what to expect down in Juneau, this legislative session. I'm a former legislative staffer, and it takes a while to learn how things work down there, how things move through the public process, especially if you don't live in Juneau and feel like you're doing it remotely. So the folks today are going to help you become a more informed and engaged citizen. So I'm glad that you are all here today. And I want to touch on three things quickly. The first is optimism. When we look at our state, we should see immense opportunity. Alaska is a world-class proving ground for climate technologies and renewable energy. We're full of superlatives. We know that. Not only is it really cold, we have more coastline than the rest of the US combined, huge tidal fluctuations, over 200 remote power systems. And when you combine all of that with declining Cook Inlet natural gas supplies and constantly being in the top 5 states in energy costs and per capita consumption in the US, we are primed for renewable energy here. So at Launch Alaska, we're really excited about the tremendous potential renewable resources can present, not only for our local Alaska needs, but also for exporting that energy in the form of green hydrogen. And to quote a number that was calculated by my colleague Rob Royes, if harnessed fully in less than 2 years, Alaska's renewables could produce the equivalent energy from to everything that was generated from nearly 45 years of operation of the petroleum fields of the North Slope. So I'm optimistic, and you should be too. And although the costs are coming down on the prices of things like solar PV panels, cells, or technologies, we still need to deploy these carbon reducing technologies at a faster rate than the market would do alone in order to meet our global climate goals. So that is where government support comes in to help accelerate this needed transition. So the second thing I want to talk about is the unique opportunity that we have right now to change our identity as an owner state to lead in this energy transition. So in our state, we're lucky enough to live close to the land. As Alaskans, we're keenly aware of climate change and the effects that that has on our communities and our economy. And add to that unique relationship with our natural resources. If you ever read our state constitution, which maybe you have, maybe you have not, you will know why we refer to ourselves as an owner state. So that means that every Alaskan truly does own our natural resources. Why is that? When we became a state, Congress granted us land, waters, and resources with the goal that they would provide for our future economy. And that's laid out in our Constitution, which reads, the legislature shall provide for the utilization, development, and conservation of all the natural resources belonging to the state, including lands and waters, for the maximum benefit of its people. So you see this in action through the way we approach resource development, how our state agencies are structured, and even through things like the permanent fund dividend, that we are owners of all that resource, and it's the state's responsibility to develop those for our benefit. And traditionally, this has meant development of oil and gas. That's been resource development for us largely. But at Launch Alaska, we see the way the global economic winds are shifting, as well as public opinion, not to mention the challenges of energy costs and reliability. And I think that development or utilization increasingly can and should involve renewable energy. Alaska can be a global leader in using the commons, our common renewable resources, for the benefit of all. And lastly, this is a historic moment that our state elected officials need to capture. We all know there are trillions of dollars in federal funding on the line, and we have the opportunity to capture the economics of projects here and make real strides toward a sustainable economy. And much of that trillions of dollars in funding is going to be flowing through states. So it's crucial to pay attention to how our legislature and our state agencies are making plans to take advantage and allocate those funds. So it's more important than ever to be paying attention to what's happening in Juneau. And while I want to make a plug, while the legislature is certainly an important body to be following, I also urge you to be engaged with your local utility. Check out their board. When do they meet? Did you even vote in their most recent election? We know that 10% or less of members vote in utility board elections, unfortunately. So we know that utilities currently have all the advantages necessary to quickly transition to renewables, which we know is needed to meet global and state goals. They have political power, access to capital, huge market opportunity, yet we're not moving quickly enough. And some may even be trying to thwart efforts to make that transition. So state legislative action can accelerate this transition through statute or by creating binding goals, with which folks are going to talk about in a moment. And public programs can push this forward. So we stop investing in fossil fuel infrastructure and we move toward the economy of the future. So I will end by quoting our CEO, Isaac Vanderberg, who says, accelerating the energy transition is not about economics or technologies anymore. Those are ready. It's entirely about politics. So the Alaska legislature will be considering several measures this year that can help accelerate our economy forward and to capture this economic opportunity. And I'm looking forward to hearing about those today with you. So thank you for being a part of this conversation and taking the time to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you, Penny. And I just want to remind people that we're going to be reviewing several topics today: renewable energy, community and tribal ownership, renewable portfolio, and a green bank. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will not visit them in between speakers, but at the end, we will be choosing the questions and helping to get them to our speakers so that they can answer them for you. We would like to introduce Petla Noden, Community and Tribal Ownership of Renewable Energy Systems. Petla Noden is a renewable energy entrepreneur and a fellow with the Tribal Solar Accelerator Fund. Petla is pursuing the development of high penetration wind farms for Dillingham and Clark's Point and Southwest Alaska's Bristol Bay. Petla?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. So yeah, I'm Petla Noden. I've studied political environmental science at UAA and Bristol Bay campus here in Dillingham. But my primary focus has been on stopping pebble mine and renewable energy such as wind. And I've been really passionate and interested in wind since 2009. And that was before I took any classes or anything. So I wanted to develop a 40 megawatt wind farm back then. And so I took a class and I quickly learned that Dillingham's load is only 2.1 megawatts. And then I've just researched every wind farm in the state of Alaska, what it takes to develop a wind farm, who developed the wind farms, what their capital costs were, and everything that went into that wind farm, from transporting it to this state, getting it to the location, and erecting turbines. So I've been planning Coffee Point Wind here in Dillingham for the last 10 years, and I've recently gone to, I went to our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., for our annual Tribal Energy Summit with our Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Gronholm, and met with many tribes from across the nation who developed renewable energy projects. So then I went to Denver for annual Indian Energy Program Review, which is a conglomeration of, or just a whole bunch of tribes from across the nation who met and discussed how they developed their renewable energy projects in their Indian country. And they just talked about for a whole week about how they did it. So I got a really good look at a lot of projects from across the nation. And since then, Coffee Point Wind has changed. It has evolved and it has grown to incorporate and working to form a conglomerative effort of 3 tribes: Dillingham with Chugyung Limited, and Clark's Point tribe, which is Sagoyak, and Manicotic tribe. And so as you see on the map on the left there, the bottom of the yellow line there is the furthest southern road in Dillingham, and that's the Vortex, Kanakanak Hospital. And so we would start there, and that line belongs to Chugyung Limited, which is my for-profit tribal corporation of Chugyung. And we would develop a wind farm there. We already have a wind study that was commissioned by BBNC in 2007 and executed by a man named Doug Vaught, V3 Energy. And they found a class 3 wind, which is an average 12-mile-an-hour wind speed. And so we would develop a wind farm there, a wind and solar, and we integrate onto the grid. And we would move south. And here's where it gets interesting. This does not cross any state or federal land. This is all tribal. So Clark's Point then would become a small utility scale wind farm. And then as the road goes south, their wind farm would expand and put energy onto the grid. Clark's Point natives would begin to train their tribal members to become tower technicians, engineers. And then we get to Coffee Point and we veer to the Snake River there, and we build a landing. And people could launch their boats and skiffs, and it would allow for a shorter, more efficient, and a safer route for commuters of Clark's Point and Manicotic. And So I would develop a wind farm on Coffee Point, and then we go into Manakotak territory, Manakotak tribal lands, and Manakotak erects turbines on their land. And so we have 3 tribes, no state land, no federal land, and we have 3 tribal utilities that are producing and delivering electricity to Nishiga Cooperative. Nishiga Cooperative then buys that power from us, and we are responsible for operating and maintaining these turbines. And then we connect to Manakotak. This line is 15.8 miles, as you can see, and that's the amount of transmission line we would need to connect, do an interconnect with Manakotak. So this involves 4 phases: develop with Chugin Limited, develop with Clark's Point Tribe, develop with me at Coffee Point, and Manakotak develops. And so we have a conglomerative effort of 3 tribes producing and delivering electricity to Dillingham. And then the ultimate plan is to begin to convert Dillingham from 100% diesel, which is our load in Dillingham. We burn 2.1 megawatts on average, jumps up to 4.3 in the summer to accommodate 3 operational canneries. In the wintertime, when the wind blows the hardest, the load is the lowest. We could begin to produce electricity to heat our homes and businesses with this wind. And that's the ultimate goal, because the average homeowner spends $600 a month on diesel to heat their homes. All our homes and businesses are heated with diesel. So we have an opportunity and we have the resource. The challenge I'm coming across and I'm learning really quickly is the importance of relationships. When you go to meet a tribe, we have to meet them where they are and work with them and until we can form this conglomeration. And that's what I'm doing right now, is meeting with the tribes and forming this conglomeration to get this off the road. And yeah.
Wow, take a breath, Petla. That was a lot. And I am really thankful to be able to hold this space for you to share on your project. I've known Petla for at least 10 years, and we were talking about renewable energy before it was cool. And so to see you to get to this point is pretty awesome, Petla. Good job.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And just to remind people, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll view them at the end of the presentations. So next we have with us Matt Jackson from SEAC. He will give an overview of the ACA proposals, which is the Alaska Climate Alliance proposals, 3 bills for this session. Matt has been born and raised in Southeast Alaska and calls Sitka Kwan his homelands. He is passionate about connecting with Southeast Alaskans with climate solutions at every level and scale. The floor is yours.
Meda, thank you. And a few corrections. I'm very happy to call Sitka Kwan my home, and but do consider myself a guest here. And lastly, I think I wish I could have changed that to Alaska Climate Alliance priorities for the 2023 legislative session, because it's not quite fair to say these are our proposals. I think these 3 policies that we're about to talk to are very modest, reasonable steps in the right direction towards addressing the climate and energy crisis in Alaska. And all 3 of them were introduced in the last legislative session, and there's many other people who deserve even more credit than the Alaska Climate Alliance in making them real and getting them onto the floor of the legislature. And in particular, I want to thank Chris Rose, who has gotten pigeonholed into talking about the Green Bank today, but really ought to be speaking in this role, perhaps, because Chris, you've just done so much work to make these ideas a reality. And these 3 policies are the Renewable Energy Fund, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, and then the Green Bank. And the Renewable Energy Fund has been a wildly popular and successful grant fund since 2008. And unfortunately, it's set to expire at the end of this year. There's already a bill pre-filed by Senator Kaufman. Thank you, Senator Kaufman, if you're out there, for pre-filing that, SB 33, that would extend the Renewable Energy Fund for another 10 years. But that is only half of the battle. The governor's budget for this year only includes $5 million for the Renewable Energy Fund, which you can ask Petla is a drop in the bucket to getting anything done in Alaska. So we need to see in the budget process, a lot more money allocated to the Renewable Energy Fund so that it can make a difference at the scale that Alaska needs. The next proposal is the Renewable Portfolio Standard. Now, the Renewable Energy Fund, we're going to hear a lot more about soon, but is a grant fund mostly for rural communities to give them the support they need to adapt renewable energy technologies. But the Renewable Portfolio Standard is more for the Railbelt, and it sets goals and deadlines for the Railbelt to reach renewable energy goals. And we're going to hear more about that from Erin in just a moment. And then the Green Bank is something that kind of fits between the two to help finance the adoption of green energy technologies. And all three of these bills were introduced in the last session and just didn't make the cut to being passed. And we have really high hopes that they will be passed this year. There's a lot of buzz on Capitol Hill about climate and energy topics. People are talking about the high cost of fuel. I work in this field all the time, and my eyebrows were raised to hear $600 a month on diesel in Dillingham. That is outrageous. And people are feeling that burn all over Alaska, even in the hub communities, the high cost of energy. So the high cost of energy combined with unfortunate tragedies like Typhoon Merbok, combined with some of Governor Dunleavy's proposals about carbon credit exchange markets, have created a lot of buzz on climate and energy policy in Juneau. And we're really excited to hear that the House organized yesterday, and we're eagerly awaiting those committee assignments. We're really optimistic about the bipartisan majority in the Senate that has agreed to focus on no nonsense core issues to the state, which I hope include climate and energy policies. And so the Alaska Climate Alliance and a lot of groups from around the state are going to be working hard and in coordination trying to support these bills across the finish line. I'm so grateful to Senator Kaufman for being the one to pre-file a bill to extend the Renewable Energy Fund. We're still waiting to see bills released for these other two concepts, new bills for this legislative session. But I think that as long as we can focus on the constructive benefits of these policies, talk about their benefits not only to addressing the climate crisis and reducing emissions, but some of the more immediate and tangible benefits, like their ability to lower our energy bills to power Alaska's next economy. If we can keep both of those points in balance, I think we are set up for success. And I am so excited to hear from the rest of our speakers in more detail about how these three policies work. And then we'll come back around at the end to talk about how we can all work together to help them across the finish line.
Yes, Gansh Matt, and my apologies. He did write he calls Sitka home, and I, in my Tlingit mind, turned it into homelands. So thank you for correcting that. So next we have with us Erin McKittrick from Renewable Portfolio Standard. She will give a brief explanation of what it is and why it is needed. Erin McKittrick is an independent energy analyst living in Seldovia. She reaches Alaska electricity issues and has been part of a number of organizations, including her local utility board, REAP, Ground Truth Alaska, and several local informal climate and energy groups. Thank you for your research, Erin. We appreciate it, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I'm here in my house in Seldovia on Dena'ina Sugpiaq lands. And like you mentioned in my intro, although I'm part of a variety of groups, I'm speaking today as myself from analysis I've done. Can you hit the next slide? So Penny gave us a lot of the positive reasons we need to switch to renewable energy and what it could do for our state's economy. And I'm going to just give a few more reasons that we really need to do it. Resilience, cost, and climate. So resilience. On the Railbelt, we are extremely dependent on a single source of energy, which is Cook Inlet natural gas. You can go back. I need to talk about that for another minute. Sorry. It provides most of our electricity, even more of our heat, and it almost all comes from a single supplier that's warned us that the affordable gas is running out and they might not have more to sell us. It's an unacceptable vulnerability. And the electric sector needs to take the lead on reducing that, because transitioning the power grid isn't easy, but it's much easier than transitioning gas furnaces in every Railbelt home. And the quicker we can reduce our gas use for energy, the more time we have to transition everything else. Also, cost. Electricity in Alaska probably isn't ever going to be as cheap as the lower 48. We're too spread out, we're too small, but renewable energy is already on par with our expensive gas energy, and it's getting cheaper while gas power gets more expensive. Even if gas prices climb just a tiny bit faster than renewable prices, that's a savings of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars over time. Finally, climate. This is a Climate Alliance webinar. Vulnerability, cost savings, each of those is a good enough reason all on its own to transition, but protecting our climate is also a good enough reason on its own. Next slide. So looking at that last slide and hearing everything Penny said, renewables are such a good idea. Why do we need to mandate them? It'll just happen anyway. And that might be right. It is a really good idea, but change is hard. Change takes time. It takes effort. And sometimes people kick the can down the road rather than making a change that's better for them in the long run. It's certainly true of me in my personal life, and it's just as true for companies, organizations, and governments. Deadlines are motivating. And more importantly, deadlines are predictable. All of the electric utilities in the Railbelt are democracies. This is wonderful. But like any democracy, new people are elected every year. Different factions take power. They have different priorities. And that's how it's supposed to work. But any major electric project takes more than a year. It takes time to invest in major changes, and utilities need stable goalposts if they're going to be able to make that transition. And that's even more true for private power producers. For private companies that could build solar farms and wind farms. It's hard to make the gamble to pursue a project in a market with only 4 unpredictable buyers. So a predictable framework and deadlines will reduce the risk and make it more likely that the projects that are beneficial on their own merits actually happen. Next slide. So there is no actual current proposed renewable portfolio standard to talk about, because there hasn't been a bill filed this year. So I decided instead I'm just going to briefly cover some of the key aspects and things that were major points of contention in the last introduction of the bill for last year. So the first thing is technology. What kind of energy counts? The main debate here revolves around 2 things. One is nuclear energy. So there was a version of the bill that didn't include nuclear energy. Later, it was added. Nuclear energy doesn't produce carbon emissions, but it isn't renewable, and people have safety concerns. The other big technology question is waste heat recovery. This is a little bit harder to understand, but basically capturing the waste heat from a fossil fuel plant and getting additional power from that is a standard part of modern combined cycle gas and oil plants on the Railbelt. So it's a question, does that count? If it does, it makes the numbers look a lot different, because perhaps a quarter of our energy already comes from waste heat recovery. So targets. Obviously, key part of any standard is what are the targets and what is the timeline. You need targets to be achievable, but you also need them to be meaningful and to drive the change that needs to happen. Currently, the Railbelt's about 15% renewable energy, assuming you're not counting waste heat recovery. And the various versions of the bill from last year all aim for a final number of 80% renewable energy with variation in the timing and the intermediate goals. For a point of reference, all of the current electric utility gas contracts will have run out by spring of 2028. Next is penalties. What happens if you don't meet the targets? The penalties proposed in various versions of last year's bill were all small, starting at about less than 1% of the total Railbelt revenue and ending at less than 5%, assuming that no new renewable power is built at all. Most of the discussion revolved around where the penalties come from, who they're paid to, what they can be used for, and whether they can fund anything useful. Penalties, they make deadlines real. That's why they need to exist, but the point is not to pay them or where they go to. Penalties, you're better off making the change than paying the penalty, but having something there that's an actual number provides a cost cap. That's the most you can ever pay. And then the last point I wanted to make was credits. So if new renewable energy isn't built on the Railbelt, but the Railbelt utilities pay someone else who has renewable energy, can that count to meet these targets? If there aren't any credits, then all the energy has to be actually on the Railbelt grid. If their system is totally open to credits, then the money is likely to flow to cheap renewable energy sources in the lower 48. So various things have been proposed to expand that, but keep the benefits in Alaska. The risk of having credits that apply to the whole state of Alaska is that the money could flow from the Railbelt to large pre-existing hydro projects in Southeast Alaska, which are great, but there's no additional benefit because they're already there. So various ways to prevent that were proposed include limiting those credits to new projects or to PCE eligible communities only. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erin. And we have some questions in the chat. Again, we'll visit those at the end of our session today. Next, we have AlexAnna Salmon. And I have to say, AlexAnna is one of our superhero or rock stars in the Renewable Energy Fund in rural Alaska. So I'm grateful to be able to introduce you today. AlexAnna Salmon with Rural Renewable Initiatives and the Renewable Energy Fund. She is a partner at the Alaska Venture Fund and leads investments in sustainable economies for Bristol Bay region. As president of Igiugig Village Council, her work has helped blaze a trail for other remote rural communities with initiatives to develop renewable energy, create opportunity, and revitalize Indigenous languages and culture. Welcome, AlexAnna.
Uyana Meda Dewitt, good to see you. Ababi Gaingunga Washkasagat Stun AlexAnna Salmon, Iviagagmiungunga. I belong to the place where the Kwijak River is swallowed by the, well, swallows like Iliamna, but I thought about it earlier hearing all the presentations. I am calling in from here where the east wind blows and the Kwijak River flows. And it's so corny, but I'm going to talk about the Renewable Energy Fund and its impact on Igiugig. So next slide. Igiugig is located in Southwest Alaska. We're a village of about 70 people, predominantly Yupik and Aleut and Athabaskan. So next slide, please. When I was young, we began comprehensive community planning because of the rising cost of fuel and electricity. Alternative energy was identified as one of the top 3 priorities, and thus we began our path ahead of the Renewable Energy Fund's inception. Today, currently, we're at $10 a gallon of diesel, almost $10 a gallon of gas, almost $1 a kilowatt hour for electricity. So I'm just going to tell our journey, which is, one of 229 federally recognized tribes in the state of Alaska. And we've had a handful of Renewable Energy Fund grants that I'll just touch base on that are part of, over 100 different projects. So I feel like we have a plethora to draw on, and we're going to go through it quickly because of time. So the next slide. After the planning and the identification of alternative energy being a high priority, the community applied to the Renewable Energy Fund grant in 2009 for a hydrokinetic project. With that amount of money, and given that the Kvichak River produces about 25% of the world's sockeye salmon, we had extensive permitting to do. We found out that it was more beneficial to do bathymetric profiling of the entire upper Kvichak and then let device companies get vetted by the state of Alaska and use their own private investment coupled with renewable emerging tech funds. And so that's why we ended up down this long path that we've been on. It also required a generator upgrade, all of these device companies competing and deploying. We did line upgrades, and in the end, in 2015, we signed an exclusive agreement with Ocean Renewable Power Company to prove and test the RivGen. Under that, we received through that process, we've received, and we're the first tribe in the United States to ever receive a 10-year Federal Energy Regulatory Commission pilot license. This was a massive undertaking, $4 million under the initial emerging tech and all of the private and federal and state investment there, and RivGen alone to date, largely under 2 federal funds, both 1.5 million under water power technology and 1 under Indian energy. We've attracted over 5.5 million from that initial Renewable Energy Fund investment. I feel like it really promoted the project. It gave companies the vote of confidence to invest in this project. Alaskan companies, our own contractors, our own workforce were used in every step of the way. And so a lot of that funding has stayed local. Next slide, please. The concept here is to go diesels off using a smart grid system. So we can feed it with we're permitted for up to 2 RivGen systems. And then we also have it designed to integrate wind power, which I'll speak to as well. I'm going to skip to the next slide. I want to make sure everybody has a chance. So basically, this is what the 5.5 million over the course of the decade looks like. The older RivGen, the newer RivGen, the battery energy storage system that's going to be able to integrate multiple renewables, and how it's assembled and then in proximity to the community. Next slide. So not only did we focus on the hydro potential, we actually applied for and received a wind feasibility resource, Igiugig Wind Resource Feasibility Conceptual Design under the Renewable Energy Fund. And what that ended up attracting was private investment to test different types of wind turbines, and it also provided for the acquisition of a large amount of land. The tribe was able to designate a big section of it for what we call inflow, Igiugig Northern Field Lab optimized for wind energy. A lot of grid research has been done. We've been able to analyze the community for energy efficiency. All of this has brought in a lot of resources and grown our local capacity for these projects. Next slide. So all of our journey to transition to clean energy, and let me tell you, today we're not diesels off. We still have a ways to go. That's a story to be continued. But it attracted the attention of National Renewable Energy Labs, which then led the development of our updated comprehensive energy plan, which was adopted in 2022. This is a community which our tribe owns our own utility and was able to adopt a very aggressive goal: reduce diesel fuel usage for electricity by 50% by 2030 while lowering energy costs and increasing system resiliency. Our focus areas are energy infrastructure, energy efficiency and conservation, renewable energy, climate adaptation, capacity development. Since this was adopted, we're already well underway with having received ETIP funding, and we have an aggressive work plan that our own locals are applying for in relationship with these partners and deploying to achieve this goal. Next slide. I just wanted to say all of this took, the initial investment from the state and belief in the state of Alaska, and the rest grew exponentially. When we first began our journey, it was very difficult to find funding. And without this initial pot of funding, I know for sure we would not have attracted the magnitude of private and federal investment. There's now billions of grant funding, low cost loan funding, and tax credits to help this transition to clean energy, and having that plan that's actionable has us headed in the right direction to get there. I wanted to, I think the photographs and the story speak more volume than any words that I have to share with you today, but I did want to take the opportunity to let the state of Alaska leadership know that it's in the best interest of Alaska to take action this session to extend the Renewable Energy Fund, which is set to expire. You see the impact it's had on Igiugig, and we thank Senator Kaufman for introducing Senate Bill 33 to extend through 2033. I feel like this funding is paramount into getting more renewable energy into rural Alaska. And I also want to thank and appreciate the forward-thinking legislators that enacted the original fund so that we are where we are today, which is well positioned to capitalize on all of the opportunities available. Goyana for having me.
Goodness, and Koyana, AlexAnna, appreciate you as always. Next, we have with us Chris Rose, who is with REAP. He'll be discussing the Green Bank and giving a brief explanation of what it is and why we need it. Chris Rose is the founder and executive director of Renewable Energy Alaska Project, or REAP. REAP has been an instrumental in development of clean energy programs and policies in Alaska since 2004. Welcome, Chris. You have the floor.
Thank you. I'm calling in from Tlingit Haida, Tsimshian Land in Juneau, right across from the Capitol. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Renewable Energy Alaska Project has been working on clean energy, that is renewable energy and energy efficiency, for 19 years about, and we're excited for all the opportunities we have going right now that have already been discussed. Just from background on REAP, for people who may not know about us, we're a coalition of about 70 dues-paying organizations, including businesses, communities, utilities, nonprofits that all have the same vision and mission to increase the production of renewable energy and promote energy efficiency around the state. We, I would say, translate technology for people and policymakers so people will understand how the policy or the technology is evolving and advancing. We've been working on policy initiatives ever since we developed the Renewable Energy Fund legislation back in 2007, got introduced and then passed in 2008. So policy is a really big driver. We spend most of our time on people. If we don't have the people who are going to operate and maintain these projects, and if we don't have an energy literate population, it's not going to be very easy to make the transition that we are attempting to make. So we spend a lot of time in the schools, we spend a lot of time with workforce development, working with state and federal agencies and national labs and so on. But we also work on financing. The Renewable Energy Fund was a great example. Work to get money to weatherize homes is another one. There was more than $640 million appropriated by the state legislature about 10 to 15 years ago, and that's weatherized more than 50,000 homes. The average heat savings is about 30% in those 50,000 homes. But it soon became apparent around 2015, 2016 that the state's budget was not going to be able to accommodate that kind of grant money anymore. So we began working on other ways to finance clean energy, particularly work in people's homes. And we started kicking around the idea of a green bank. We've been working now for about 6 years with experts who have developed green banks around the country and even around the world to understand how we could do that here in Alaska. And finally, 2 years ago, we got the governor to introduce a green bank bill. A green bank is essentially a quasi-governmental entity that does the really heavy lifting that private banks are not doing to develop new loan products and programs for clean energy financing. And one way to explain this is you couldn't get a car loan the day cars were invented. banks first had to look at this thing called a car and say, wow, what's the risk profile of that thing? Now you can drive off the lot with a zero interest loan in a vehicle that depreciates the minute you get off the lot. But if you go to a bank today and say, hey, I really want to make my house more energy efficient, they'll say, sure, we'll give you a 10% loan. We'll give you 5 years to pay it back. Well, obviously that does not work for most people. What green banks do is design products that would perhaps reverse those terms in my example. So give you a 5% loan, give you 10 years to pay it back. So now all of a sudden, the money you're coming up with every month to pay your utility bills is instead going, part of it is going to pay for the loan that's lowering your utility bill. So it actually decreases the risk of the loan because the people already have the money to pay the loan back. The bill almost made it through the legislature. We got through several committees over the last couple of years, and literally, I think it died on the 1 yard line, if you want to use a football analogy. Unfortunately, the bill was set up so that ADA, the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority, would have housed it. They have a lot of banking experience, but there was a lot of pushback on ADA, and that bill, I think that was the reason that the bill ultimately did not get to the House floor. So we've worked hard over the interim. I think the bill is going to be reintroduced soon. We believe the governor will reintroduce it. We believe it'll be reintroduced to have the home for it be at the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, which is the same entity that administered all those energy efficiency and weatherization programs we were really aiming to continue anyway. So we're very hopeful that we will have a strong support in the legislature this year for a green bank. I think it does make a ton of difference when you look at all of the federal tax credits and incentives that have come out of the Inflation Reduction Act to have a green bank here in the state to complement that. Because even if you get a 30 or 40% tax credit to do something to your home to make it more energy efficient or to put solar panels on, you still have to come up with the money in the first place. And you still have, you only get those tax credits after the fact. So if we can have a loan program that provides affordable loans to people that allows them to pay back over a long period of time and to have a reasonable interest rate, then more and more people are going to take advantage of the technology that we have today. Things like rooftop solar or heat pumps here in Southeast in particular. But just making your home more efficient and therefore a more comfortable and productive place to be. So there are a lot of opportunities for us as a state, I think, to develop a better system that is really kind of a place where people can find access to these different financing tools. And we're very happy that the Inflation Reduction Act also included what is being called the Clean Energy Accelerator, which is essentially a national green bank. And the Environmental Protection Agency is been tasked with executing that national green bank, and it's on a fast track. We hope that in the next several months, we'll have a much better idea of how that will support state green banks around the state. But one of the original intentions of having a federal green bank was to help pay for the operational costs of state green banks. The idea behind a green bank is not that the state would have to come up with all the capital money to make these loans. Rather, the real focus and intent is to get the private banks who are not doing this now to be educated so that they actually want to get into these new lines of businesses and work with the green bank using those programs and products. But the green bank still has to hire people, and they still have to get staff who are actually going to do this heavy lifting that I'm talking about. And it's real possible that the federal green bank could help pay for those operational costs that HFC would incur if it became the state green bank. So another thing to talk about with green banks that people ask about is, well, what about this program? What about that program? We'll be able to do this, we'll be able to do that. And I think one thing that's really important to talk about is the fact that green banks typically have developed one program at a time. And it's very likely that if we get a green bank here, that we are going to be focused on residential energy efficiency first. And then we will branch out from that as the green bank gets more and more successful and more people know about it. The Connecticut Green Bank, which we've modeled a lot of the work that we've done on, is up to 6 or 7 different programs. And they have developed those one at a time, because you're not only developing a loan product, you're developing how to advertise and market it to a certain sector, a certain consumer audience. And so not every consumer audience is going to do everything. You have to really tailor these different programs to different needs. So one thing we did get in the bill at the very end of the session last year, I think it's very important language, is a priority, because even though the Green Bank has a kind of a laundry list of things it could potentially finance, we really want to focus on the buildings that are inefficient around the state. So the language that was put in the bill at the very end last year was that the priority of the bank shall be renewable energy and energy efficiency for residential, commercial, and community buildings. So we really want to focus in on that first. And then hopefully we'll be able to de-risk more and more community generation projects around the state. And that will entail some of the other work that we talked about, which is workforce development, making sure that we've got local people in each of these communities who can operate and maintain and optimize the projects over time, because that's what a bank is going to look at. They want to see that a project that's being built to generate power is actually going to operate and be maintained and optimized over 20 or 25 years. And if we can do that, I think we can get financing for these projects. So I'll stop there to make sure that we have enough time for questions, and appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. We're going to transition to Matthew Jackson for our final call out, and then we're going to hear from Kay, who will share with us the questions from the audience. Are you ready, Matt?
I'm ready, and I'll just keep it really brief because I think it's important to have the questions. All of us panelists up here are working hard, talking to legislators, talking to community leaders to bring these 3 policies across the finish line. They're very modest, actionable proposals. They've been introduced in past years, but they just didn't make it across the finish line. So we know we can do this. We just need a little bit more energy to get them across the finish line. So I hope our talks today have got you amped up to call your legislator's office and have a constructive conversation. Just tell them you want to see action on climate and energy this year. If you can remember enough about one of these proposals to talk to them about it in detail, tell them you really support the Renewable Energy Fund or the Green Bank or the RPS, whichever one spoke to you. But just please do take the time to send an email or make a call. The legislature is getting to work, and we need to get to work making sure that this is a priority for them.
Well, thank you, Matt, for all your work on that. We'll go to the questions. We've received a lot of questions. The first one is from Eric McCollum. Could the Renewable Energy Fund be set up as a revolving evergreen loan fund that would encourage the legislature and the state to be willing to increase funding as the debt would mostly be paid back? And I'd call on Matt to respond on that.
Well, I'll just say briefly that I think rural communities deserve a grant fund. If you're a very small village like Igiugig or Angoon here in Southeast, repaying any kind of loan can be quite a burden. But I also think that the Green Bank meets some of that need down the road, as Chris said. And I think that question came in before Chris's presentation. So revolving loan funds are great, but I also think the rural villages deserve a generous grant funds.
Hey, I can add to that. When we introduced the bill in 2007, it was a loan and grant fund. We wanted it to be introduced that way, and the loan part was taken out, ironically.
We had several questions. Could someone talk about the proposed carbon credit the governor is proposing? And I know there are differing opinions on that, but I'll call on Penny to just give a few comments about it.
Oh, yeah, several of these were answered in the chat, including that one. I mean, I think we're sticking to renewable energy today on this webinar. The governor's proposal is out there. There's been some good reporting on it and discussion. I think there's a robust conversation around this new revenue generating option he's talking about, but the bill hasn't yet been introduced unless it happened this morning and I haven't seen. So I think we're all waiting to see details from that. But the general idea, as I put in the chat, that he's interested, which I'm inspired by. I mean, thinking about different ways to utilize our natural resources. And the idea is that exploring additional revenue sources in Alaska in the form of carbon sequestration and storage, and also carbon credits. And many Alaska Native corporations, including my own, Sea Alaska, already engage in carbon credits in the California market and to preserve forested land. That's one example of this. So I think we're all waiting and to hear more when that proposal comes out. But it's pretty innovative and not something I've seen a lot of state governors propose. So it's certainly interesting.
Thanks. We'll await more information on that topic. There's a question here about batteries and how batteries are crucial for wind and solar. And how does that compare when we factor in the batteries into those other projects? How does that compare to fossil fuel? I wonder if Erin could, I know you've had some experience in that arena, just comment briefly on how batteries fit in.
Sure. I mean, batteries help stabilize your system and allow everything to run more efficiently, both the existing fossil fuel generation and variable renewable energy. They, as far as how that compares, there is no free lunch. So there is some impact cost, including environmental impact, to any way you can produce energy. But batteries plus renewable energy end up being a whole lot better for the environment and the climate, and also economically, than our fossil fuel power.
Thank you. We have a question here about ADA. And this commenter says it's been clearly demonstrated it's been bought off by the fossil fuel industry. How do we kill off ADA, and how does that relate to the proposals that are pending? I'm going to pitch that to Chris.
Well, I have no comment on that. That's not the business that we're in. We're working with state agencies to try to make stuff happen, and that's not in my bailiwick.
The Renewable Portfolio Standard, is it affected by ADA or the Green Bank? I know it's the Green Bank that was going to be in ADA, correct? But now it's going to be somewhere else?
Right. As I explained, it's going to be moved to the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, HFC, which has been traditionally working, on a retail basis, I think, with homeowners and building owners around the state. So I think it's a great home for it. The Renewable Portfolio Standard is going to be enforced by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. So in a Railbelt utility would have to show compliance to the RCA, and the RCA would be the the entity that would enforce compliance.
One of the panelists, one of the questioners is asking, unfortunately, Alaska is a major hydrocarbon exporter and politically is not likely to support full replacement of hydrocarbons with alternative sources. How will your positions be put forward to change oil industry attitudes? Do any of our panelists have thoughts on that?
Well, I can just say that the 700,000 people who live in Alaska's total annual energy budget is a drop in the bucket compared to the oil and gas industry in Alaska. So if Alaskans went 100% renewable, I don't think the oil and gas industry would really blink. We have the gas supplier in Cook Inlet that supplies 100% of Anchorage and the surrounding area's heat and 85% of its electricity, saying, please do more renewables, don't count on us. And so right now, I don't think that the oil and gas industry is any kind of an obstacle for doing more renewables. It's typically more along the lines of making sure that our co-ops actually are able to move forward with these new technologies and adapt to a more regional plan in the Railbelt.
Thanks. Well, I see that we're beyond our time to end, so we'll wrap this up. We've had several questions about how you can contact people, and we're now sharing the contact information, and we'll also be sending a follow-up email to those who registered with links and with our information so that you can follow up if your question didn't get answered yet. And we want to thank you all for being part of this, and I'll just turn it over to Meda for closing remarks.
Yes, Ganesh Chish, we weren't able to get to everybody's question. Even ICT Con sent one that says, can we combine renewable energy and agriculture? And I say, yes, let's do it. But if you have any other questions for our panelists, their emails are now in the chat for you. Thank you for spending an hour with us today. This will be recorded, or was recorded, and will be put, I believe, on YouTube and accessible to everybody who participated today. So have a wonderful Thursday afternoon and enjoy our Alaska. Ganesh.
Thank you.